Chapter 7. Soon after Charlotte left Edward's side, she made her way to see her mother. The butler had confirmed in a hushed phone call that Mrs. Hale, to his knowledge, remained unaware of the tragedy. It was not surprising. The house ran like a fortress when it came to news, especially bad news, and the staff had been instructed years ago never to disturb Mrs. Hale without her children present. Reporters had already begun calling, but the butler had intercepted every inquiry and turned journalists away at the gates with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent his life protecting the family from the outside world. He was already waiting when the taxi arrived. Straightening his jacket, he watched Charlotte step out, pale and stricken. "Good evening, Miss Charlotte," he murmured, bowing his head slightly. He made no mention of the calls or the reporters who had arrived earlier. It was not necessary to mention it at this time. He led her through the hallway, where the quiet grandeur of the house stood in stark contrast to the devastation about to unfold. Charlotte followed wordlessly, her eyes still puffy from tears. The foyer led into the familiar living room, and the house greeted her with its usual air of quiet opulence. High ceilings, ornate cornices, and polished marble lent the space an almost museum-like stillness. Charlotte inhaled shakily. Somewhere in this vast, elegant space, she would have to shatter her mother's world. Inside, Mrs. Catherine Hale sat poised on an embroidered chaise longue. Her silver hair caught the light of the late afternoon sun as it streamed through tall windows. The butler announced Charlotte's arrival with a subtle nod. "Miss Charlotte, madam." With another slight bow, he exited, leaving mother and daughter alone. Catherine Hale's face brightened with a smile that softened the fine lines around her eyes. Despite her 70-something years, she remained the epitome of elegance, her carefully curated appearance a testament to the type of life she had lived. "Charlotte, darling," she said warmly, rising slightly to greet her daughter. "Mum," Charlotte replied, her voice faltered beneath the weight of what she had come to say. Catherine studied her closely. Her maternal instincts sensed trouble. "How are you, my dear? I haven't heard from you or your brother Edward. We talk most days. What is suddenly up with you both?" she added, half to herself. Her gaze locked onto Charlotte's, and the faint smile faded. "What is it? What's wrong?" Charlotte hesitated and struggled to find the words. Her mother's perceptive eyes narrowed. "Give it to me straight," Catherine demanded, her voice firm despite the unease that crept into it. "Mum," Charlotte said, trying hard to keep the panic from her voice. "You hardly visit on short notice," Mrs. Hale continued, her voice cracked slightly. "And Edward, he always calls on a Friday. He hasn't missed a single week in 3 years. So, I'll ask, how is Edward?" Her voice grew fainter with each word. Her frame trembled as she stood and moved toward the tall windows that overlooked the garden. "How is Edward?" she asked a second time, her tone now pleading. Charlotte's breath caught as her mother's tears began to fall. The older woman turned from the window, her shoulders shaking with dread. It was the same wrenching fear she had felt years ago when she lost her husband, a pain that never truly healed. "Mum," Charlotte began, her voice breaking as she moved closer, reaching out to comfort her. But Catherine was frozen in place, her eyes fixed on some distant point, as if bracing herself for the worst impact. Finally, she spoke. "Is he—" She could not bring herself to finish the question. "No, no," Charlotte said quickly, her voice rising in hysteria. "He's out of surgery, but they don't know if he'll make it." Catherine's knees buckled slightly as she gripped the heavy curtain for support. "Why didn't I know about this? And Rachel? Is she with him? Is someone by his side?" Charlotte was silent at the question. When she finally spoke, her words were a dagger. "She put him there." "What?" Catherine gasped. Her frail hands clutched the fabric tightly. "What are you saying, Charlotte? You're not making sense. She stabbed him, Mum. Rachel. She did it to him. Catherine stumbled back onto the chaise longue, her hand pressed to her heart. The revelation settled heavily in the room. Please, tell me he will be all right, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Charlotte shook her head. Tears streamed down her face. I don't know. The doctor says we have to wait and pray. The prognosis, it's not very good, Mother. The two women sat in silence, their thoughts tangled with fear and grief. The chime of the doorbell shattered the stillness, its sound unnervingly loud. The butler reappeared in the doorway. He cleared his throat gently, never intrusive, always measured, and addressed Catherine with the same polite formality he had used for decades. Madam, he said softly, the Crown Prosecutor is here to see you. Charlotte nodded her blonde head slowly and murmured, Give us a few minutes. The butler bowed slightly and exited the room, leaving the two women to their thoughts. Charlotte reached for the ornate tissue box on the antique side table and pulled out a few sheets. She offered one to her mother, who took one and blew her nose softly. Her dignity remained intact, even in moments like this. Minutes later, the soft knock at the door heralded the entrance of the Crown Prosecutor, Gerald Thornton. He stepped into the room, and even his presence was prosecuting. His tall, imposing frame seemed to fill the room, and his sharp, angular face bore an expression of measured control. His piercing eyes had a steely glint that could unsettle even the most self-assured witness. Gerald Thornton had been a close family friend for years, a fixture in their lives since his university days at Oxford, alongside the late Mr. Hale. The two men had been inseparable, standing as best men at each other's weddings. They shared holidays and later supported one another through the trials of life, divorces, and even death. When Mr. Hale passed away, Gerald had stood by Catherine's side and vowed to look after her and the children. He had attended every graduation, every milestone, and was as much a part of their family as blood could make him. To him, Edward was not just a Hale, but like a son. Catherine, Charlotte, he greeted, inclining his head respectfully. Catherine stood, but wavered slightly. Charlotte moved to steady her and placed a gentle hand on her mother's arm. Gerald, Catherine said, her voice cracked slightly, but she managed to hold his gaze. I came as soon as I heard, Gerald said as he stepped further into the room. His gaze softened as he took in their grief-stricken faces. Catherine gestured for him to sit, her movements slow and deliberate. Thanks for coming, Gerald, she said in a hoarse voice. She had only just heard the news, and Charlotte found her mother's composure amazing. You never really knew what was going on behind her blue eyes. We are at a loss, she added. Gerald sat across from them. He leaned forward slightly, his large hands clasped together. I want you both to know, he began, his tone empathetic, that I will handle this case personally. I owe it to Edward. Charlotte's eyes widened slightly, and she blinked back tears. You don't have to do that, she said, though her voice wavered with gratitude. Yes, I do, Gerald replied firmly. Edward is like a son to me, and this Rachel woman... His jaw tightened, and for a moment an uncharacteristic flash of anger crossed his face. She will face justice, I promise. Catherine's hand trembled as she reached for her daughter's. The room fell silent, each person consumed by their thoughts. The faint chime of the grandfather clock in the corner marked the passing of time. After a moment, Gerald spoke again, his voice softer. How is Edward? He's out of surgery, Charlotte offered, but the prognosis isn't so good. Gerald nodded gravely. I want to know if you have any specific requests for this case. I want Rachel to take the chair, Catherine replied, her tone cold. Gerald raised an eyebrow. The chair? What chair? Only a few countries still use the chair. Well, the injection then, or the rest of her life in jail, whatever it takes to make her pay for what she has done to this family. But he isn't dead, or is he? Gerald questioned. No, she said sharply. The statement hung in the air. Then let's leave the talk about the chair for now, Gerald said after a pause. Besides, we don't do the chair here in Britain. She can get many years for attacking a defenseless man, he added, his voice a low rumble of certainty. Catherine nodded slowly, her eyes misty. Let's start with that then, shall we? She walked a second time to the grand window and looked out, her face bathed in the light as it peeked through the lace curtains. Outside, the garden stirred gently in the breeze, and the old Victorian window ledge was littered with petals blown in from the blossom branches nearby. Gerald glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking almost imperceptible, then pulled out his legal pad. Please tell me everything you know about what happened, he said, pen poised. Don't leave a thing out. Anything you say could be useful. Charlotte cleared her throat and stole a glance at her mother, who remained stoic as she stared out at the beautiful garden. Well, Gerald prompted. Charlotte hesitated. Her hands shook slightly. Rachel must leave their lives for good. I wasn't there when it happened, she began. I came by to have a conversation about a charity summer event with Edward and saw the table all laid out. The table was set for a romantic dinner with their finest china, candles and petals. The lights were dimmed, the fire was glowing. Rachel, said she would surprise him because he'd been so busy lately. She paused to gather her thoughts. I was in the living room and remember thinking of leaving to come back another day for the charity discussion. I heard Rachel call out if someone was there. Next thing I heard was a grunt and a thud. Gerald leaned forward. Was that like him falling or something? Charlotte shook her head slightly. I wasn't sure, but it made me quicken my steps. I went to the dining room and saw Edward on the ground. Blood was oozing out of him. Her voice cracked and she choked on her words. Across the room, Catherine's composure began to falter. For the first time in her life, Charlotte saw tears glisten in her mother's eyes. The sight unnerved her more than recalling the memory of the incident. Her mother's steely nerves had always been a constant. Now, those nerves seemed to crumble under the weight of her words. And Rachel? Gerald prompted. She just stood there watching him with the kitchen knife in her hands, transfixed. It was as if she was having an out-of-body experience. Edward lay there, defenseless, writhing in pain, and she just watched him. Charlotte paused again. She needed some water. I rushed to his side screaming, then called 999. The golden question is, why did she do it? That is what the jury would need. Her motivation for harming Edward, Gerald said, letting his legal expertise take over. Charlotte shrugged. I honestly don't know because there was supposed to be a romantic dinner, and it seemed as though she had gone out of her way to prepare it. Was there any argument between the two? Gerald asked. No, in fact, he was out and she was waiting for him to come back home for dinner. Gerald's expression darkened. Did you fear for your life while you waited for the ambulance? His question was pointed, his tone almost coaxing. Charlotte hesitated. No, she admitted, though the answer felt wrong. She glanced at her mother, then back at Gerald. Think again, Gerald urged, his eyes narrowed. Consider how you felt in that moment. Maybe, Charlotte murmured, her voice barely audible. Gerald did not blink, his expression hardened. Yes, she finally whispered. The word escaped her like a twisted lie. I suppose I was scared for my life too. Gerald leaned back, a faint smile played on his lips. Brilliant, he said, his tone approving. Have you given your statement to the police? This was how Charlotte's statement took shape. In the hours that followed, doubt hardened into certainty, grief into conviction. Her brother lay fighting for his life in a hospital bed, and that alone became proof enough. By the time she repeated the words to the police, they no longer felt off. They rang true. And in following Gerald's careful guidance, she convinced herself that Rachel Brown was not only capable of violence, but deserving of whatever came next. Within her officials are like wolves tearing prey, shedding blood and destroying lives to extort profit. Ezekiel 22:27.